it's not the same job. It's not. It's different from company to company, right? And like we have all this PM media trying to tell us how like we're all not PMs. Like I'm a PM, but you're not. You're a project manager, right? This constant battle in PM media, like trying to define it. And I almost wish there were more words because it is different from each company. Like it's one of my first questions in interviewing. Like, what is product management like here? It's a very eye-opening question, and like to poke to like to nudge more on their answer because it is different everywhere, right? And therefore, like the interviewers need to change, right? And to unpack a little bit what I was talking about, like that defining your interview bit. So once you have this nailed, if you spent time with it, a little more upfront time on like job descriptions, what skills are we looking for? That becomes that deconstructed rubric, right? If it's collaboration, discovery, what are some core questions? And always ask the same questions. You're going to calibrate yourself. It's amazing. And don't worry about it. People aren't going to game it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Supra Insider. This time, we sat down with Mike Curti and Josh Herzig-Marx for a deep dive into one of the toughest and most important topics for any product leader, hiring. Mike recently completed his own job search and brought tons of fresh insights about how companies are currently approaching hiring. And spoiler alert, it's messy. Josh, a trusted advisor to early startups, helps founders hire their first product leaders and knows exactly what separates successful processes from the rest. We unpacked everything from why structured interviewing is critical to practical tips for catching biases early, and even debated whether being a great interviewer actually predicts job success. Whether you're hiring your first PM or your hundredths, you'll walk away with actionable advice to sharpen your approach. Thanks for listening, and let's jump in.
If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app, follow us on Substack, give us a rating. It'll help us a ton and help future people discover us while also making sure you never miss an episode. Thank you.
Mike, Josh, Ben, great to see you all. I'm going to actually let Josh kick this one off. Just some quick context. Josh pinged me and Ben in Slack, be like, hey, I just got out of the Supra meetup in Boston, had a great conversation with Mike about hiring. We should definitely bring him onto the pod and have a conversation. So with that, Josh, I'll pass it on to you to give a little more context.
Yeah. So I've met Mike now a bunch of times through the various Boston area Supra meetups, which are a ton of fun. I'm going to plug those for folks who aren't already in the mailing list. And the most recent one, towards the end of the evening, when we had finished up all the kind of fun, not work-related things to talk about, the weather, Boston sports teams, family, all of those things, we got to talking about one of my favorite topics, which is hiring and running a hiring process and interviewing. And I just came away really excited. Mike is one of the few people I know, particularly from outside of big tech companies, outside of kind of FANG and similar companies, who has just a super strong feeling and super strong opinion about how the hiring process should go. It's something he told me a little bit about how he brought to companies where he's worked in the past. I also knew that he was going through his own interview process for his next role, which I think, congratulations, just completed successfully. And the fact that we seem pretty aligned didn't hurt either. So I was excited to bring him on the topic. This is, for what it's worth, one of the number one things that my clients want to talk to me about is they have a lot of anxiety about hiring. And I think that's probably warranted. It's a really important topic for every company. It's especially important to startups. And I thought it'd be beneficial to certainly me to talk about this in this setting, and hopefully for the folks who listen as well.
And some quick clarification there. When you say you mainly work with heads of product or first time kind of product or the first product hiring companies, so is the question around like how they hire their first PM basically, or is it also on the other side of like also getting hired as their first PM?
Yeah, so I'm really careful not to pretend that I am a career or interview coach. There are a number of people who do an outstanding job of this. One of them happens to be on this podcast session as well. I think I've learned more from Ben about what it's like to go through a hiring process, particularly at big tech, than anybody else. And I'm not interested in applying for that. And I've never taken his course, but all the content you put out is amazing. So I'm not that. This is when I'm working with founders and first-time heads of product who are doing their own first hiring, either for their first product hire or for their first report.
So the conversation you two had in Boston, not to spill the beans, but was it equally focused on the company side of how you think as like hiring managers to structure processes to find talent, and you split your time with the candidate experience, or did you guys mostly hang out on one side of this or one perspective?
Mike, tell me if you think I'm remembering this correctly, but I think part of it was complaining about the terrible job that lots of companies do with their interviewing process.
Yeah.
It's just a truism I share with everybody. It's like most companies are bad at hiring, which means you can't take away too many lessons from one's own experience in the market. I think it'd be really, but I think we pretty quickly pivoted towards a more positive conversation around like, how could this work? How should this work? And how do we make the industry better?
Mike, if you had to break down your perspective, could you unpack it for what makes, before we get into what the world could be like or like the better way of doing things, like what struck you as like the parts that are most broken, at least functional about the ways companies are hiring right now?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I was thinking of a quote, and it might actually be Josh's. I know it's not mine, but it was basically like, hey, through these 3 years of layoffs that we've had in tech, right? Hiring processes have fell through the floor. They're like an afterthought, right? You're no longer hiring. And it makes sense, right? In a layoff, like who do you let go of first? Your recruiting team, right? You're not going to be hiring anybody, right? And so now that companies are starting to hire again, there's no one around to think about what's a good candidate experience. Like a lot of that stuff has gone out the door. And when you have thousands of inbound candidates, you care a little less. It's just organic and human, right? So it's what I actually saw, and I was lamenting was my own experience. It's just a wild gamut of different processes that went on for 8+ weeks. They didn't even know who the next interview was going to be. We'll get back to you. Like I saw every kind of bad thing. And then what I also saw was just a lot of emulation of what big tech, of what we've been doing all along, right? The combination of multi-rounds of behavioral, some kind of like work study test or case, and not always like clear rubric. And also like the feedback I got was not tend to be about like style over substance, right? Like what we were concerned about executive presence, right? This is stuff that like so a long way of saying I just saw a lot of bad practices, and it rung a bell for me because like a quick digression would be like when I was working at Wayfair, and one year, I want to say it was early 2018, mid 2018, we looked back and we hired a lot of people. It was a big hiring error. And we lost 50% of our PMs. And mostly it was what we would term non-regrettable. And it just dawned on me, like, what are we doing? And that's why I went deep down this rabbit hole and tried to find folks to mentor me. I happened to land in some in the Boston area, Rich Perrette. I owe a lot to him as a mentor who got me like really excited about this stuff. And it really, long way of saying what it really came back to was having a structured interview process is so important, and doing all the upfront work around getting like JDs, we all hate writing them, but you like really need to focus on it and deconstruct like what skills you're hiring for, what's the profile, defining a rubric to it. And then the real stickler, probably where Josh and I went off, was you really need to train your interviewers. I've had some terrible interviewers, and it's not their fault. It's something where you never get any feedback. Is the interviewer ever evaluated? And oftentimes my favorite thing is you'll hire someone senior. Like I'll hire a Ben, a Josh, a Mark, and then within 2 or 3 weeks, you might get thrown into an interview. Do you have any idea if that person's a good interviewer or not? So you're just throwing people out the wall. So this just creates an atmosphere where like we're stuck in a loop of we're always doing the same thing we've done before. We're not really asking why this process might work for some of those bigger firms. What is the real answer? Does it work? So I want to help people. Like going through that exercise and working with my own HR team, we drastically improved how we were hiring PMs. I saw monumental improvement by just going through these steps.
Can I add one extra thing to that? I think it's important, right? Your point that if you have a good process based around a real plan and a real need for that role is going to fill, and you train people to execute on it, you are likely to do better in your hiring, right? You're more likely to hire people who will be successful at your organization at the moment of time when you're doing the hiring. But there's one other advantage to this, which I think lots of startup execs don't realize, which it's really fast. The last company I worked at before I went into my whatever we call the semi-retirement thing, they had the rec open for their head of product for, I don't know, 6 months, longer, 9 months. They hadn't ever really been successful with a candidate. And as I went through the process, and I'm not saying anything out of turn, I told them this after they hired me. As I went through the process, it was clear why, right? They didn't have a plan that would result in them making an offer to a candidate where the candidate was excited to accept the offer and they were excited to have the person come on board. There's no mechanism for that happening. Whereas if you do have a plan and you do execute on it, you can have somebody great hired in 6 weeks. Realistically, with the number of candidates who are looking today, the number of applicants you're going to get, if you have a plan, if you have all the pieces set up in place, ready to go, like you can have somebody great quickly. And that's months of time you are accelerating your company timeline if this is really a critical hire. So speed and quality, right? Sometimes you get both of those.
I think I agree with pretty much everything I'm hearing so far. And what I would add in my head is that given that I've been a PM at Series A, B, C, E stage companies and then Facebook stage, I just feel like the skills that are being evaluated at every stage of company are very different. And I think that as a result, the process that's in place to evaluate people is also very different. Like I got hired into Facebook as like the 2000th product manager or something like that out of 45,000 people. The people that interviewed me never spent a minute working with me. So it was all a bunch of other PMs. I didn't have any interviews with designers, didn't have any interviews with engineers. Like it was all about me being evaluated by other PMs. Okay. If you compare that to my process of interviewing at a company like Abstract, which at the time was like a Series B, B2B SaaS design collaboration platform, that was like 50, 60 people at the time. And I had interviews with the engineering manager, a designer, the CEO, the CTO, the head of business operations, right? So it's like when you think about when you're joining a company at the Series B stage as the first PM, you're going to have this like cross-functional panel evaluate your ability to talk their language and collaborate, right? So I just feel like the processes are fundamentally, I'm not saying it's how it should be, but I'm saying is that today it feels like there's two completely different types of processes for evaluating product people based on the stage and I'm sure other factors.
Can I ask a question to the three of you? I'm genuinely curious, right? For Wayfair, for Facebook, for Asana, what is the thing that you saw the organization trying to optimize for, right? Trying to solve for in their hiring process they built? Because these are companies full of smart people. My assumption is they're effectively optimizing for something. It's not always clear from the outside what that something actually is.
I'm happy to go first because I was the last one, but just likelihood of success on the job, I think, is like the short answer. Like they're trying to and I think at Facebook that really, or if you imagine how many iterations of the hiring process must have happened until the process landed on where it is today. Because a company like that moves really fast all the time. The baton continually gets handed from one person to the next to oversee the hiring process. So after all of those iterations and all of those loops of feedback, where they've landed is it really boils down to three things for the vast majority of product managers. It's product sense, which we could talk about, analytical thinking, and then leadership and drive. They're trying to find people who have those three buckets. And I think where things get tricky is not every candidate and not every interviewer and not every person has shared definitions of what strong looks like on each of those dimensions. So they have to structure a process that's meant to try to create somewhat of a consistent, unbiased rubric of some kind.
I want to push Mike and Mark a little more on that because obviously the goal of this is to find people who be successful. And Facebook is excellent because they really name the different parts of the interview they're interviewing for. But I guess I'm more curious from a business perspective, right? Taking a step back from actually within the interview itself, is there a risk they're trying to avoid? Is there a part of the company strategy they're trying to optimize to be able to hit? That's what I'm trying to get to. Does that question make sense? You look like you know what I'm getting at.
It does, but I kind of don't want to answer it because I'll give you my take. Because here's maybe our first spicy point, right? I think there's just survey bias in that, right? What we're not considering, and this happens in finance too. Like I happen to have friends and family in finance, right? And you assume that people who work for Goldman Sachs are amazing, right? And they come from there or like consulting. If they came out of BCG, like McKinsey, like we should hire them, right? It's like brand new resume, but it's survey bias because like if you go back to like how do companies attract candidates, right? It's generally three things. You have brand, talent, and comp, right? So brand is the obviously one, right? What I want this company on my resume is going to open doors for me in the future. Talent could also be opportunity, right? Is there someone like really smart I want to work with, or is this project I get to work on AI now? So I really want to work there. Maybe I'm willing to have a little less pay, but I know if I get to work with all this cool tech. And then there's comp, right? And comp is the easiest one to manipulate because when the other two aren't so great, you just pay more. You're pay out of hand. And then The funny part is these buckets are not mutually exclusive.
Can I add
right?
another one? Culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
But isn't
sure.
that talent? That's like
kind of talent. Yeah.
I feel like the culture is how people engage with each other.
Yeah. I think you could also trickle down into like hours, intensity, and flexibility, which I think is like another part of the equation.
Almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've been working on this one for a while, so yeah, I probably need a better word because like it's like talent, opportunity, culture, whatever. There's one word for that bucket. But where I want to go with this is what I think like a lot of these big companies need to step back and say is, oh yeah, we have really great employees or we hire these people. Is it because of the process or was part of the job attracting people? Right? Mm-hmm. It's if you were going to play a game of backyard baseball and only the all-star team showed up. So you're like, yeah, no matter who I pick, they're going to be amazing. Right? They're able to get like more like high quality people to show up at the front door. Right? When you don't have that brand, you don't have the funding, right? When you're a smaller startup, right? Think about like how huge of an advantage it could be if you've got a better hiring process. If you can identify the diamonds in the rough, right? If you don't treat your hiring process like a test and you're actually like being an investigative journalist and you're trying to like suss people out, wow, stop fishing in the same crowded pond as everybody else, right? Like that could be amazing. And so that's where I think a lot of this gets inflated. Is Google really good at hiring people? Like at selecting people? Or is it part of they've got a decent process, but they're also good at attracting people?
Can you say, you said you dropped this really interesting thing. You talked about investigative journalism in the hiring process. I know there's a lot more behind that.
Yeah, that's probably another big point for me. What I tried to train folks on is, so a lot of people organically treat interviewing like a test, right? And we come from a very academic culture, millennials, right? We like your high need for achievement individuals, right? That's us. That's a lot of people we work with. How do I get the A, right? You should start your whole life like, how do I get the A? And you used to studying for the test, right? So naturally you also start giving tests, right? And so there's a lot of, maybe we can get to bias at some point. There's a lot of natural biases in work and hiring. So are these people like me? Are they as smart as me? You're testing them. You need to flip your mindset. A good way to train your employees to be better interviewers is you're an investigative journalist, right? I'm going to date myself. I'm going to use Oprah, but like, I don't know, whoever the modern best investigator. But if you break out your inner Oprah, right? It's almost like that first question doesn't matter. I train my folks to like give the question, give the person like their 2 to 3 minutes, right? Kind of lay out the path of their story. And then your job is you're trying to get the answer, right? You're not going to trick the person. You're not trying to grade them, right? You're trying to figure out like, do I want to work with Mark? Can he do this job really well? So be a detective, be an investigative journalist, and find the answer. And also, that's another strategic advantage. That's also, and having a clear rubric that you're trained on. Did I get the answers I want? You can reflect back to it during the interview, ask very poignant questions. Like it's a big unlock.
Isn't that a case for standardizing and like structured interviews though? Because you want to have a consistent rubric that interviewers are trained to get the signals for?
Yes. I'm just saying like it's more of, it's a good way to put it. It's more of the mindset of the interviewer, right? So I am totally arguing for structured interviews. There's research that my mentor pushed me down that really shows that this is the only thing that's really predictive of on-the-job performance is structured interviews. And it's only a 0.65, by the way. So most interviews are useless. But yes, structured interviews is really important. Having a rubric is important. But I'm saying how you go into it is really important, right? So the failure mode here, let me give you a failure mode. I got this more than once from an interviewer. Boom, here's the behavioral question. Tell me about a time when you had to make some serious short trade-offs that hurt the long term in favor of the short term on a product that you worked on. And they just listen. They just don't maybe you're like too verbose. They're not redirecting you, right? Maybe I always teach folks to look out for the pronoun game, right? Like I'm hearing a lot of we's, right? What did this person do? Ask them like tactically, like, okay, so we convinced the stakeholders to get on board in this project, make this short-term trap. What did that look like? Did you write a PowerPoint? Did you do a lot of one-on-ones? Right? Get out of the way. So it's like that methodology versus giving the task, letting them ramble on an answer. You're not giving them feedback as an interviewer, right? Especially not being in person, right? I'm not getting your body language. You're not giving them any kind of feedback. They ramble for 5 minutes and you go, okay, next question.
Yeah,
right?
we would
That's
call
the
that
failure.
nudging. We would call that nudging. And that's like a big thing I coach people on is like, some people tell me like, I hear Facebook interviewers are like really aggressive and argumentative. I'm like, give me an example. What have you heard? And they're like, well, I heard that like they interrupt you and they ask you to keep going or ask something about it, change direction or I don't like that. Could you come up with something else? And I'm like, yeah, that's not them interrupting you. That's them nudging you. That's them telling you you're not giving them the signals that they need.
I think in the context of a behavioral interview question, it's slightly different. Like, I think the outcome, the experience for the person being interviewed might be the same, but I think the reasoning is really important, right? Because when you're asking a behavioral interview question, it's because there's a thing the person is going to need to do in this job, right? Because you've written the job description, the real job description, not the marketing
Again,
one.
not true for big tech companies, though.
Not true for big
because
tech.
the
Right.
person that's doing your leadership and drive interview, which is the main behavioral interview at a company like Meta, will not be working with you and have no idea what JD you're going to be filling.
Fair. So I'll keep it focused on startups. I suspect there's some overlap because you know what the kind of work is one has to do inside of Facebook, presumably. They know what behaviors make somebody successful, or that's the base of a behavioral interview, right? It's the idea that the best predictor of how somebody's going to act in the future is how they've acted in the past, right? The best predictor of their abilities in the future will be their abilities in the past. And if you happen to know, right, you're the founder, you're the startup, it's time to make your first product management hire, and you know that one of the challenges you have in this job is this constant tension between closing short-term business and building against a longer-term vision, and this tension is going to come up. You want somebody who's done this thing before. The reason for the nudges isn't because there's a right answer to this question. It's because you're trying to figure out, did this person actually wrestle with this or not?
So I don't think the nudges, in the context of what I described at least, I'm curious what Mike thinks, but they're not meant to get you towards the right answer. They're more about, hey, I'm taking notes. I'm going to give you a score at the end of this interview. As things stand, I'm not saying this to the candidate, but I'm saying it with my nudge, right? Reading between the lines is what I'm trying to say. Is you've given me an insufficient amount of signal about this area. And if it stays where it's at, it's not strong. So I'm going to ask it a different way, or I'm going to try to give you another opportunity to say something more insightful about this thing. Otherwise, basically, you're going to fail this section, right? So
and do you ever say that's
what I mean.
Do you ever say here's what I'm trying to figure out, and I'm looking for you to tell me?
Literally,
yeah.
In real interviews, I have an analytical thinking interview. I'm in the metric section, and someone's saying something that they think is a metric, right? And I'm like, how would I tell a data scientist to put that on a chart? What's the exact definition of that metric? Can you help me understand it? And they still don't articulate something that sounds like a calculatable metric. And I'm like, okay, I'm actually is it like a line graph? Is it a bar chart? Is it a number? What does it mean? What has to happen in the world for it to count towards the metric that you're describing? What's the action that has to happen? I get something that's dodgy, and I give them a 1 out of 5 on setting metrics because they literally cannot define what a metric is. That's an example of what I mean.
That sounds like a great example then of Mike's kind of investigative journalism, right? You're telling them the thing you're trying to figure out, right? Because not every role at every great company is going to be right for every great candidate. And you're not trying to have the person pass. You're trying to really figure out, does this person have this skill or this ability or this particular experience? So I love it that you made it that clear, that obvious to them. That's great.
Yeah. I think the interesting observation here is that there's almost an advantage to the scale of Meta because people are not emotionally invested in you liking them. Their role is I need to get signal for the company, whether you're good or not. So then you're more comfortable being rude, or not rude, but nudging people and really pushing because you're not going to be working closely with them, and you might not be the one closing them if they want to join. Versus if you're the CEO and you're interviewing your head of product, I wonder if people are maybe holding back a little bit because they're I don't want to come across as a jerk who's interrupting, and that's going to be how I show up to work. So I wonder if there's something there. But I'm curious, Ben, what is the incentive for how do you incentivize interviewers to get the interviews right and to be really good at nudging? And
so interviewers, I think, have an inherent incentive, to Mike's point around the brand value of having Meta or Facebook on your resume, right? So for me, coming out of Facebook, it was still Facebook when I was there. If Facebook gets a reputation of being a place that breeds mediocre PMs, or people are not strong PMs at Facebook, that degrades the quality of that part of my resume. However, if Facebook has a very high bar for PMs and people generally view it as a place that really strong PMs come out of, then that makes my resume look a lot stronger. So that's one big way that I'm incentivized to keep a high bar. The second is I can't speak too much about the internal processes that are used at Facebook. I'm still under an NDA there, but there are mechanisms through which you could basically understand what other people think about the candidate after you submit your feedback. And basically, you don't want to be the one who's giving this person was incredible, whereas everyone else is no, this person is not good, right? So I think there's a little bit of kind of But and the same is true in Series A, Series B companies where I've been in, by the way, where if I'm on the hiring group, the hiring panel, and we're doing a debrief about a candidate, and everyone, it's like we all play the game of 1 to 4, like strong hire all the way to one being a strong no hire. If I'm putting up like a 4 and everyone's else like a 2, how does that make me look as like
Not a
an
good
interviewer,
look.
right? Yeah.
But you shouldn't be afraid to do that. I don't think I know if that's where you were going. Again, part of that hiring revamp journey that we went on was I realized for the purpose of hiring committees, like we collect all this written feedback on candidates, right? And it goes into some tool like Greenhouse. You use it in the hiring committee and then it's gone. So when I was trying to figure out like what did we break, I started working closer with HR and they thought it was a pain in the ass. But I was like, hey, can I get some of that data? Can we revisit the feedback from those hiring committees? And sure enough, there were signals that were there. We just weren't good at eking them out.
Were they equally good for like, there was a high correlation between everyone saying this person would crush it and them crushing it, and then everyone saying they're a bad fit and we're happy that we didn't make that decision? I guess you don't have data on the ones you don't hire. So it's only about basically the
That is
level
a
of
challenge,
excitement
yeah.
about the ones you did hire.
So we were able to reverse engineer some false positives, basically. And it was interesting. There were like on multiple interviewers, there would be hints of if it was like a communication thing or this person's just hard to work with. One particular candidate I remember, we were all like soft yeses, like maybe there's one strong yes out of the hiring manager. They really wanted to fill this role because it was a pain in the butt for them having to cover it. And then the engineering partner was the only one who was like a no. And so they decided to hire this person, but it was there. Like, it was like, we look back at the feedback and, that also helped us calibrate too, is like often one thing we started saying is like, often is your soft yes really a no? Are you just afraid to be the person to say no? So when you have those, we did it like from strong no, like soft no, soft yes, like strong yes. Strong yes, you're an advocate. You're willing to say hire this person no matter what. It was funny, like those votes on the line, like a lot of people, and that was part of training people who was like, it's okay to say no. It was amazing the amount of people who were just like, I'm a soft yes, here's some concerns, but I wouldn't hold them back.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of just given where the market's at today, I can't think of anyone I've been working with that landed a job where it seemed like the company was a soft yes. I feel like because the market is so competitive right now, I feel like my guess is the job you just got, Mike, I'm sure they were like a very strong yes. Like I think for anyone to get hired today, they have to be a strong yes. Would you agree? There's not a lot of like soft yeses happening right now.
My snarky take would be, I don't know about soft yeses, but there's many ways you can get a job. By far, referrals, nepotism, that stuff's still there. More so than ever, right? You have to go in with a warm lead. You need an advocate in the hiring committee. Someone in Supra said this to me and it just clicked. I was like, oh, you're so right. Because I was getting all the way through multiple final rounds. Everybody seemed excited, like incredible feedback. And then you don't get the offer. It's like one of them I found out they had 4 finalists, all referrals. Recruiter said you all could have done the job. One was an internal candidate who's never done anything else. They've done the exact same job their whole career. And that's kind of where the market is. They're hiring for a lot of, very risk averse, right? And looking for, hey, can I find someone who can prove to me they've done this exact same job before? Right. So it's going to be very hard for a candidate. It's going to be very hard for a candidate right now to like switch industries. Like I'm interested in fintech. They won't call me back because you have to have 5-10 years of interest. Where every other job I've ever had has been kind of I like an eclectic mix. Like I want to try something new. So that's just the danger I see in the current market. And you're going to get a lot more groupthink because of this, right? If you want your company to be innovative, but you're only hiring from your competitors, right? You want that 10 years of fintech experience. You're going to end up on the same answers, right? Aren't we always going to get the same thing?
Yeah, it's almost like this market incentivizes hiring teams to like dot their I's and cross their T's and check all the marks of like how to make sure that we find someone that we can check all the boxes so we de-risk this decision. So then we can kind of justify that headcount and be like, hey, we've actually looked for exactly that person, as opposed to going more with like excitement of I'm really excited to work with this person in this regard, despite the fact that maybe they're not like don't check all the boxes, but maybe they check 3 of the 5 that are maybe most important for the role.
I'm still seeing 3 cases where, I don't know if I'd ever describe these things as soft yeses because founders never like to do anything softly, but 3 cases where they're making what I would describe as possibly mistaken hires or certainly coming from a mistaken process. And I don't think this necessarily changed a ton. One is if they don't have access to a strong candidate pool, or they don't have access to a strong pool of candidates who will say yes after having made an offer, typically because, as you said, Mike, in the very beginning, it's a weak brand or it's weak compensation or both of those things. It's hard to be a weak brand with strong compensation. Put those things together and you're not going to be making offers to people who will necessarily be as exciting for you. And that's number one. The second one is I still see a crap ton of credentialism out there. People say, oh, you've worked at McKinsey, or right. The best versions are you worked at McKinsey or you worked at Google or you worked at Facebook. So therefore you must be smart. So therefore we'll feel good about making an offer to you. I think nepotism is just a form of credentialism as well. It's just a very personal form of credentialism. So I still see that happening a lot. And maybe, Mark, that aligns with your people are tempted to dot their I's and cross their T's. But the third one, I think, has become even more pernicious in this day and age of the demand side of the equation having more power, right? The hiring teams having more power is a lot more focused on hiring people who do well in interviews as opposed to hiring people who do well in the person who I think is going to best be able to do the job. So here's my ideal candidate. When I'm a hiring manager, it's a person who is terrible at interviewing, just a disaster when it comes to interviewing, and they never took your class, right? But they can do the job, right? Why is that my ideal candidate? Because I don't need to worry about them leaving. I don't need to worry about competitive offers, right? I can make them a great offer and they're going to take it because they're not getting anything else. That's my best candidate. But I think too often, particularly inexperienced execs will do the opposite. Right? They'll go on the internet, they'll ask ChatGPT, they'll read LinkedIn articles, they will maybe try to cargo cult what big tech companies are doing with their interviews, trying to ask the same kinds of questions, right? They'll buy Lewis Lynn's book and treat it as an instruction manual, right, for how to hire. And they will hire people who are really well prepared for the interview process. In startups, a lot of time, it's people who can speak confidently, right? People who can say, oh, here's how you solve your problem today. Right. Not
so I'll take I'll take the flip side of this. Okay.
Please.
So I think the reason you want to hire someone who's good at interviewing, I think it's a false trade-off between someone who's going to crush the job and someone who's good at interviewing, first of all. So I think it's a false dichotomy.
Right. I agree. They're orthogonal to each other. I don't mean to call it a dichotomy. These are two separate skills. Yeah.
But I have a specific opinion about why you want to hire someone who's actually good at interviewing. And there's a couple of reasons. One is interviewing is a communication and presentation of your thoughts game. It's how you present yourself. It's how you bring people along in your thinking. That is essentially the skill ultimately of interviewing. It's how do you communicate, tell stories, and make people follow your thinking and understand you. And maybe even get energy from spending time with you and want to spend more time with you. So there's an element of impressing them. I like that for two reasons. One, I think that it's easier, like if the bar for making a hire should be like a fuck yes or no kind of bar, which I would encourage many teams to reach, then I think it's hard to get to a fuck yes with someone who's bad at interviewing. So it's definitionally not going to get you to a fuck yes because you will be underwhelmed by them during the interview process. Okay. And then the second thing is, especially for a product leader, this person's going to be spending a lot of time with customers and a lot of time with users. And you want to hire someone who could present you and your company well and can communicate really well with customers and partners and just generally be like an effective, influential leader in the company that steers things in the right direction. And you want that person to communicate extremely clearly to engineering and design and sales. So I think it's almost like definitionally the skills that you want in your product leader have to translate to presenting yourself well in an interview process.
But then I think the thing that I would argue there is, are you not giving them like fake signal if you polish too much in interviews? Because then you're almost...
I think that the best people don't come off as like rehearsed or too polished. They just come off as like fluid and organic and like good communicators, right? Like, so obviously like don't memorize shit. Like if people see through fake performance, right? If you're going to memorize every word of your story for every answer of an interview and you think that means you're coming off as very like fluid and organic, you're wrong. Like you come off as robotic and overly rehearsed. So that's not what I mean.
I'm going to push back a little bit. Actually, Mike, do you want...
Yeah, I guess I hear what you're saying, Ben. I think we're framing it in like the extreme ends, right? Like we said, like a terrible interviewer. And a lot of what you said rings true. But just like having gone through this, I think it's like table stakes nowadays to practice the STAR method, to maybe have a case interview format, right? Like it's a thing that can be gamed, and there's a cottage industry of courses, and it's not their fault, right? Like I use the academic analogy again. It was right. If how you're going to be evaluated is to take an SAT, SAS, and to take the SATs and write an amazing college essay to get in an Ivy League school that could change your life, then yeah, you should get help if you can. If you can afford those privileges, then do it. But a lot of these interviews are like, I think what we're missing is, especially in this tight market, it's probably table stakes that you have to do this stuff, right? You have to be really buttoned up. They're all looking for the STAR method, right? Did you actually like, there's again, like a little checklist on like how performative you are. It like biases towards verbal agility, right? I'll use myself as an example. I have two very active kids, lots of activities. When you have a full-time job, very busy life, and very early on in my job search journey, found a job I was very interested in, but I wasn't as practiced and rehearsed yet, and went in there, gave great answers. Like I got great feedback. Like I'm still in contact with some of the people who work there. I didn't get the job, but it was performative, and I got the feedback I got was style, right? So that's what I'm seeing in the
But what
market.
was
So
it
I think
about? What was it about the style? Did you get like double click into what it was about the style? Was it like really polished, but they thought it was inauthentic, or was it super authentic, but it's not a good fit with the kind of culture they have? I'm just curious, like to unpack what's
well,
not
that's
getting
part
a
of the
job
problem
over
too. Is
style means. Yeah.
another problem is that Canada, you don't get a lot of feedback. We live in litigious society. It's like really hard. But that particular job, like, I don't remember. I think it was, we got through all the questions we wanted to with the other candidate. Some of your conversations ran a little long. We loved your experience. It was really analogous to what we wanted to build. I didn't get much, but it happened to me more than once that it was clear that, hey, this is my point. It's kind of like, this is the universe we live in. I'm not going to be able to change the rules of the game, right? So I need to learn how to play the game. So that's where I spent my time, and things improved. But I think what I'm trying to point at is that what you want? Like as a company, do I want something that can be gamed and practiced? What am I actually hiring for? Is that actually predictive of people being on the job? We also did this in 2019 at Wayfair. I like did a study of like, so in a big organization, quick digression, like a big organization, multiple PM orgs, we diverged, right? We all didn't have the same picture of hiring. But the HR team was all the same. And as I was working with this woman, Ellen, talking to her, she did a great study. Basically showed here, she broke down, here's all what the different organizations are asking for, like an MBA degree, engineering, top school. Here's the things we should be hiring for. None of it was predictive.
Was there something that was the most predictive of like on the job success that they found?
It's like a history of getting results. Like there's some of like intangibles. That was the hard part of the story. Like some intangibles that came out. We were trying to do again like really long feedback loops with this stuff, right? We were trying to use performance reviews,
And
we
they
were
did
trying to
those
say
every
like,
what, 6 months?
we did them every 6 months at that point.
Yeah.
At least annually was the big one. And we tried to take like the ones and the twos, like the high top. It was a scale of 1 through 5, where 1 is the top. We tried to take the ones and the twos and reverse engineer them. And there was just no correlation with their background, like what companies they work for, what degree they had. It was all over the map.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, go ahead, Josh. Looks like you were going to say something.
I'm thinking, Mike, about the practice that you did so by the way, good job, right? You did the thing you're supposed to do, right? You listen carefully for whatever signal you get from the interviews, and you focused on the areas where you get better. I guess the question I have is, to what extent did that practice make you a better product manager and product leader? I know it made you a better, yeah. And that's the point where, as a candidate, go do all those things. That is your best return on investment you can possibly make. Again, I am pumping, Ben, your course. Everybody who's taking
I don't coach like behavioral interviews, just to be
that's
clear.
fine,
Like, so
right?
all this stuff that we talk about, like I've stayed away from it because I actually don't feel confident in my ability to coach people on how to tell their stories in non-formulaic, authentic, organic ways that are really good.
Which is great.
I just don't.
But also,
Yeah, I've
most
learned that.
places don't really do behavioral interviewing. Not the way that I would think the behavioral interviewing should be, beyond just like the very surface question, tell me about a time when. But as a company doing hiring, that would be my concern, right? Am I pushing for people's behaviors am I pushing people to practice things that will make them better candidates, but not better at the job? So every time, yeah. I guess let me get even more specific, right? You actually brought up a good example of this, which is it's important to be verbally deft, because you're going to be going and talking to customers. You're an enterprise B2B company, executive presence, talking to clients, being effective in that kind of a situation is really important. So it might make sense to say, okay, part of the job description is being verbally deft with clients. So verbal deafness in the interview could be predictive of their ability to be verbally deaf with clients. I think that's a totally reasonable thing to say. But if you were my client, I'd be pushing you a little bit to say, okay, what behaviors in the past would you be looking for? I'd say the actual prompt I use is I say, imagine you got a little drone, right? Little spy drone, right? In their current job, and you're watching them day in and day out. If they were good at this thing, right? Having great presence with clients, right? If they're good at this, what behavior would you expect to see? And then what behavior do you expect to see? And then what question are you going to ask them in the meeting that will let you know if they exhibited this behavior in the past?
You're bringing up such a good point.
Yeah.
Because like one of the things, like the first thing that came to mind to me is if I'm evaluating a PM and how they engage with clients, not the only thing, but one of the things is their ability to run like a product discovery session, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just like to interview a customer, to interview a client about a pain point, try to really narrow in on something that may end up being the thing that could solve like the problem that they have, right? I've actually never seen in an interview, I'm trying to think, I don't think I've seen or heard of a PM being interviewed at a company where they've asked the PM to run a discovery session with the interviewer to treat them as if they were a customer or if they were a user of the product at that company, and how they would go about trying to learn about their problems. That feels to me like it would be a great way to actually evaluate their skill in a not tell me about a time kind of way. That's not a structured formulaic interview.
Yeah. Another way to think about it too is, can you get signal from people if they're treating their job search as a discovery process on themselves? Are they asking the right questions to you as the hiring manager and to different people in the company to help them make the right decision, whether this is the right place for them and whether they should hire them or not? But that's another kind of way to think about it as well, right? And I feel like we don't really pay attention to that part, but I think that you just learn so much from people of how intentional and what kind of questions do they ask and what parts of the process do they push for, what parts they don't. But yeah, I totally agree. I think that's like the key question, right? It's like, how can we bring like the way we assess if someone's good at the job versus someone is good at interviewing, and how can we like have them converge in a way that's productive? And I think it's a really hard question.
Go ahead, Mike.
I might take it somewhere else. Ben, go.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like the deeper we get into this conversation, the more I think I feel conviction on something I said earlier, which is the big tech evaluation process is so fundamentally different than the early stage one, because the example I just shared of the customer discovery conversation is probably super applicable for like your first PM or your head of product at your Series A, Series B company, something like that. But I didn't do a single customer discovery conversation at Facebook the whole time I was there, because I had to let the UX researchers do the customer conversations. There's like an actual discipline for that, right? It's hard to give this like silver bullet advice that's going to be applicable to all PM hiring at all stages in all roles. It's so nuanced, like the specific, and this is, Josh, where I agree with you about evaluating fit. You want to be evaluating fit with what that company needs at this point in time. If the CEO needs to hire a head of product who's going to talk to customers a lot because they just can't spend as much time with customers as they need to, then that probably should be a very important factor in who they hire. But if they'll never talk to customers for some reason, that's less important.
So right there, that's it for me. Like the big thing for me, like throughout my entire product management career, like what I wanted to tackle is product management. We all have the same job title, family of job titles. It's not the same job. It's not. It's different from company to company, right? And like we have all this PM media trying to tell us how like we're all not PMs. Like I'm a PM, but you're not. You're a project manager, right? This constant battle in PM media, like trying to define it. And I almost wish there were more words, because it is different from each company. Like it's one of my first questions in interviewing. Like, what is product management like here? It's a very eye-opening question, and like to poke, to nudge more on their answer, because it is different everywhere, right? And therefore, like the interviewers need to change, right? And to unpack a little bit what I was talking about, like that defining your interview bit. So once you have this nailed, if you spent time with it, a little more upfront time on like job descriptions, what skills are we looking for? That becomes that deconstructed rubric, right? If it's collaboration, discovery, what are some core questions? And always ask the same questions. You're going to calibrate yourself. It's amazing. And don't worry about it. People aren't going to game it, especially if you're an investigative journalist. So imagine a rubric, like you have a column, it's like discovery. Like here's what we're looking for. Here's some sample questions the interviewer could use. Give them follow-up questions to do that and help them. What's the follow-up question that they should be thinking about? Have it defined, have some examples of what strong no to strong yes looks like, and keep calibrating on each other. And then that's your version of product management. And that's okay. Who cares what everybody else says? But nail that, like for you. Because yeah, it is going to be completely different. When you work in a big organization, I worked for a lot of big companies. You have a customer research team, right? And then you like, there's a team for everything. And then you go work for a 50-person company and you're like, this happened to me. I said, oh, who does the reporting on this, that, and the other thing? They left. Like, here's a SQL editor. So the job is different everywhere. And there probably should be one universal definition of product management, in my opinion.
Is
I
this
agree, and
moment
I
to talk
think
about
that
bias?
yeah, it's a good moment to talk about bias. Just wanted to share one quick thought, piggybacking on what Mike said, is like that you mentioned like the columns. You have your things you're looking for, and there's like a column for every like main thing you're looking for. For anyone listening who's in this process, my strong advice is generally that you should have each interview should focus on one primary set of signals that you're looking to
Yes.
evaluate versus having multiple interviews assess a mixed set of the same signals. So what I mean by that is if there's one signal that works well with engineers or whatever, technical fluency, have one interview that with someone that you trust at your company that can evaluate that. And then if one is about customer empathy, have another interview that's like all about that. So you get people to be able to get somewhat specialized in sussing out the signal in a specific area once you define what those areas should be. Go ahead, Josh.
I was thinking about this well-written rubric, which hopefully you establish before you start interviewing anybody. And I was wondering if that might be a good moment to talk a little bit about bias, because it's, I think, one of the things that every company with a thoughtful plan tries to avoid. What's the advice they give to candidates? Most interviewers make up their mind about you in the first 30 seconds, right? It used to be with the handshake. If you're responsible for hiring and you have a team of people doing interviews for you, you should be very nervous about that. Because if they're making up their minds in the first 30 seconds, they're not going through your rubric. They're not following the plan. And you're going to be less confident than when they give the person a 1 or a 5 or whatever the score is, that it's going to be based around like the behaviors, the abilities, and the qualities you're actually looking for.
I'm curious. Okay. This is something I got to frame this carefully. I, like many people, am a big fan of processes that are designed to reduce bias when hiring people in mass. Okay. So what I mean by that is Facebook cannot afford to have the next 1,000 PMs hired arbitrarily based on the bias of the interviewers. Okay. It just doesn't scale in that way. They might optimize for the wrong things, but at least they'll know every single person that makes it through the door will objectively pass a certain structure. Okay. But when I think about you're a founder of a 15-person company and you're hiring your first head of product or your first product manager, something super personal to you, right? This is your baby. You've worked on it for 5-6 years. You finally got it to the point. Mark, I'm thinking about if you were to ever bring someone on to run Supra, I don't know, like something super personal to you, right? You need to feel something emotional about that person to feel comfortable. There needs to be chemistry. You need to feel excited and energized by them being around. So I'm trying to figure out, like, is that bias? Is that leaning into bias? And is that a bad thing? Do you guys think that someone's going to go astray, be led astray if they seek that?
Could it just be cultural fit, right? Like if it's a small company, right? Like you as a founder set the culture. So I think as long as you're explicitly setting, here's what I value and here's what I think someone will do well working with me, that doesn't seem biased. But I think when it's biased is when you don't have it as part of the rubric and you're just like implicitly being like, hey, I like this person, I like this person. And I think also that's probably how you make mistakes, right? Because you don't really take the time to reflect of do I like these people or this person because they're exhibiting the behaviors that I think are important for me to put in culture. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, it's like really hard for me to untangle like evaluating culture fit and almost like leading with bias to some degree, right? Like embracing my biases is like, this person feels right. It's hard for me to pinpoint what it is, but it seems like they'd really fit in. Like that's obviously like the toxic way that I think like leaning into bias feels and sounds to me is like the boys club. We're not going to let someone in the boys club because they don't fit in. But there's still like this concept of like culture fit that I'm trying to figure out what its relationship is with the idea of bias in my head.
So one thing I might throw out there is general like bias training. I've taken one course. I'm not an expert. It was part of training at a company. But what's interesting to me about how they approach like bias training is it's not about like when you're like you're biased, like if you feel bad, you want to deny it. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about shaming or not having the bias. It was like about self-awareness, right?
Like
Trapping it.
unconscious bias.
Yeah, like thinking
Yeah.
fast and slow, right? Like great book. This is actually a good thing. Like human brains are wired to make shortcuts, right? And it
Blink is
helps us
another
think.
one of those books, right? Malcolm
Yeah,
Gladwell, same kind of thing.
right.
Yeah.
So that's actually a positive, right? Like you're in products, like talk about product sense, like that's what's going on. You've seen something enough, your brain has done enough experiments, and you make the shortcut, right? But there's a problem with that sometimes, right? So sometimes you'll in this first 5 minutes thing is real. This is what I would train interviewers on. You're going to make up your mind the first 5 minutes. Train yourself to try to make the opposite case in your head too. It's again, trap it, recognize it, trap it. Another big problem with bias is this can happen, like that early interview talking, like I don't know where you guys went to school, but like, oh, hey, you went to Dartmouth too, blah, blah, like, oh, you know John? Yeah. And instantly there's a bias. You like this person, right? They're going to get a leg up for better or worse. And so it's just being self-aware, right? And the other way that piles out, I know bias is really important. You want to have hiring for diversity is really important to me. But it's like also diversity of thought. And so I think there's a lot of problem with the hiring processes and these biases, right? Again, going to my fintech point was like you want to have a diverse team of thinkers. If you only hire people from the same industry, school, background, MBA, right? Folks who are just like me, white men who went to Ivy League schools and work for consulting companies tend to prefer other white men who went to Ivy League colleges and work for consulting companies, right? So, like, you need that diversity to increase your discussion, right? If you have that one person on your team who's a product manager, let's say you're all very technical. There's this one person who's a former graphic designer. Amazing. They're going to come up with different ideas. They're going to connect different dots, right? So it's like checking some of these biases, not thinking in that interview, hey, this person's not technical like us, so this person probably couldn't do the job, right? And trying to work around that bias. So again, like being self-aware, being able to trap those things. Again, if you go back to the rubric too, like eventually like calibration is really important.
I think
Yeah.
biases is just the bad version of culture fit if you don't say it out loud. There's really nothing wrong with hiring for cultural fit, particularly at a startup company, right? Like you're the founder, you know the kinds of people you work with. You can only be focusing on so many different kinds of things, and hiring folks who you just know you're going to be clashing with maybe isn't the right strategy right now. Maybe it's a failing in your part. Maybe you should work on it, but that's the truth of where you are right now. You need to be explicit with yourself about it. The place you get yourself into trouble is if you're lying to yourself. You say, we are looking for a diverse company, but you discount everybody with differently colored hair or a different gender or who didn't come from a top school. Then you're not doing yourself any favors. And frankly, you're wasting an awful lot of time, right? You could have dealt with most of those people in the resume screening process, unless you're breaking the law, in which case, don't break the law. Don't be a jerk. But it is okay to have preferences for the people who you work with, but you have to make that part of your hiring plan. And if your hiring plan is illegal, then you should take a good, long, careful look in the mirror.
Yeah. Just be careful with cultural fit. I would just like press on that because that could be another like catch-all bucket. There's a couple of catch-all buckets in the hiring committees. So again, cultural fit's fine. Say your culture out loud.
Yeah. Be specific.
Right.
Like an example, I think of a constructive, I'm curious to get your takes on if there's, I think they're really good examples, but like an example of a positive, non-discriminatory or whatever kind of culture fit that is like, moving fast, I guess, is like a catch-all these days, but we like to test our hypotheses really quickly before building product. That's just like how we like to work. Like we don't build product before we test hypotheses. So someone who has a hard time operating that way, that seems like a good way to disqualify someone from a culture fit perspective that has nothing to do with like bias and stuff, right? Like people that just have a hard time with that concept. And then you could design an interview question around, tell me how you would test this hypothesis without building a product, something like that.
Yeah.
Is that what we mean? Is that a good example?
That's, yeah. Or for example, let's say that you value people that push back and disagree, like disagreeable, like some founders like people who are like, disagreeable, right? Like I think if you could have a questioning interview process, or if there's been like, or maybe that you can have almost like in every conversation you've had, has this person actually disagreed with me anywhere in the process? And then based on that, you can measure it. That's like another one that comes to mind.
That makes me think of our last episode, Mark, with Troy, where he talked about manufacturing conflict in interview processes to simulate how it will play out. Obviously doing so thoughtfully and at the right time, but not shying away from asking what feels like an important clarifying question that the other person may have seemed to dodge or not give you a satisfactory answer to.
Yeah. I wonder also going back to the bias question, I almost wonder if like you can solve a lot of it if you just before entering your notes after an interview, like the first question is, are there any biases that I might have here in this candidate that I should be aware of? I wonder like how positive would that be? Because I feel like just like that little journal, like I think can go a long way before even you fill out the rest of the interview. That was just
Like when you're in a jury duty and they disqualify you during jury selection because you might have some history with the kind of topic that's being discussed in the trial, so that makes your judgment less objective.
Yeah,
I like that.
Good work.
It's interesting. I wonder how it scales, because you'd have to almost disqualify yourself probably before talking to the candidate. They work at a company I used to work at. Conflict of interest. Shouldn't. I probably would view this person more favorably than if they didn't.
Yeah.
If I have a positive impression of that company.
Yeah, or you could have someone else interview them, right? Be like, hey, I might have been a little bit biased here. But I think I agree. I think ideally you catch that before you talk to them. But if you did that like after, I think you can pivot and find another way to get the signal that you need. Yeah, I think the thing that really resonates with me is that as a hiring manager, especially if you work at a company that's not massive, Meta or Google, that has like a very clearly defined process that works. I think when you say, hey, you need to plan a hiring process that works for your company, that feels very daunting. And I think it's really hard to get started almost. And I see why people then fall back to, oh, like Meta seems to be really good at this, I'm gonna borrow that from them. So it's almost like it just feels very, like daunting to build a hiring process from first principles, especially if you're doing it for the first time. So if you're talking to that founder, like, can we make it a little bit easier for them to deconstruct what it takes to build that process? I think that would be really useful and valuable for people.
Mike, you can write up
by
your
defining the job. Get clear on the job first is my first advice. Go ahead, Mike. A lot of times they're not clear on what they're actually trying to hire.
Yeah, I agree. So that's a separate topic, but 2 seconds on that. Like, yeah, I agree. Like there's a messy part of this I always found useful is like early on in trying to find a candidate, I would just take a lot of interviews, even if people were borderline on paper, because I was just calibrating myself. And I would just get way better at like understanding like what I'm looking for, like revising the job description, even calibrating my recruiter. So there is something to that. It's very expensive, of course, but in terms of helping someone set up, I actually don't think that it's that hard. And ChatGPT, like the AI might really help with this nowadays. Have a conversation with the coworker or by yourself, like record it, transcribe. This is what I'm thinking for the role. This is what I have to do day to day. These technologies are really great at summarizing things. So you can have like your unorganized thoughts, have it get together, like the formation of a job description, what skills. I think reverse engineer your rock stars. That's always where I started. Take who you think your top performers are and reverse engineer them a little bit in terms of what they're doing on the job. Again, not background, are they an MBA, right? And then a lot of this research is out there. We could probably share it off the podcast. It's pretty simple. You start with a job description, you create a rubric, you identify what skills you want, start picking out behavioral questions, you train your interviewers, you shadow each other, right? So you get feedback. That's one of the biggest gaps you're going to encounter. Interviewers never get feedback. So I don't actually think it has to be that hard. It has to be that daunting. I think like just adopting like a FANG company process, again, goes back to you're probably missing those 3 employee branding drivers when you're looking at it. So you might want to look there too. So build up your hiring process, but also start thinking about your brand, your talent, and your comp, right? This is why you see meetups die, but maybe the meetups come back, your employee blog, how do you make a name for yourself? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
I agree it's not that complicated. I think it is helpful to have a clear starting place. A couple of options. I have a write-up for how to do this along with a sample flow and sample questions, which I give to all my clients and anybody else who asks. So if you're doing this for a product manager or for a head of engineering, hit me up and I'm happy just to share this as a starting place. It's also a great spot, particularly if you're expecting to do a fair amount of hiring, to go bring somebody on to help you. Partly because I think there's a ton of value, as I said in the beginning, of having a really good process, right? A good process means you hire somebody quickly, right? A bad process means you could take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months easily without making an offer to a candidate that you're excited about or they're excited about the offer. But also because you can dramatically improve your candidate experience if you avoid some dumb things. And I wonder if it might be worth talking about candidate experience a little bit. Mark, I know that you hear a ton from super members who have frustrating experiences, and Mike, you've just been living this.
Yeah.
Because it's an easy place to get right, but it's also an easy place to screw up, and that's the fastest way to kill your branding.
Yeah, and I think that's what I meant by it. Maybe if you dissect and decompose all the different parts of the hiring process. Maybe individually, they're not that hard, but I think the hard part is like one, if you've never done it before, like what are all these different parts you should have to have a good kind of hiring process. And I think it's good for your company, but also good for the candidate. I think that's one. And then executing on in each one of them, and then also sequencing in the right way. I think there's definitely like maybe one or two that are very high leverage, maybe others that are not as much high leverage, like also like understanding how much time to dedicate to every one of them, right? I think that's the part that makes this tricky. But yeah, let's talk about candidate experience. I feel like that's maybe helpful for people to hear. Here are the things that are no-nos that are lead to that can kill your brand, and maybe here are some things that are just easy, low-hanging fruits that are very high value.
I'm curious what you all think, but to me, the lowest hanging fruit is responsiveness and proactive communication. So just tell people where they are in the process, send them no update updates. If you're at the finish line with another candidate, be transparent about how there's someone else. I'm a big believer in radical transparency. And I think that in this market, people know that every role they're going for, they're going to be up against 3 or 4 other people that are extremely qualified. So people's egos, if someone's, I don't want this job because I was like the second choice. Good luck in this market, right? Everyone is someone's second choice right now. So I think that just being really communicative and really responsive and proactive, I think to me is the cornerstone or table stakes with any great candidate experience. But I'm curious what Josh and Mike think.
Yeah, set up your ATS. If you don't have an ATS, don't try to run this out of like your email. Go get yourself an applicant tracking system, Lever, Greenhouse, Ashby, they're all great. Get the thing set up before you start taking applicants. Make sure you have it set up so that booking and scheduling happens automatically, so that updating people on where they're on the process happens automatically. These are easy things to do. I think all of these systems have templated versions, which are better than not doing anything at all. Go and take the easy win. Spend a little bit of money.
Yeah, I would say having gone through this, again, back to that quote, like just some of the first folks to get laid off were recruiting teams, right? So these processes are all over the place, right? What a good process looks like, we always like strive for, was to be very clear with people, like what the process is, like how many interviews you're going to do, condense it, don't do it over 8 weeks. Have your interviewers lined up, have a hiring committee lined up, give them the timelines, try to stick to it. To Ben's point, yeah, communication just kills everything, and it's really hard for the folks who are out there and been laid off, right? Or looking for a job for a long time, right? Just not hearing anything. So being super communicative. But yeah, like once interviews are over, you want to move to get someone an answer pretty quickly. That's really critical. Beyond that, yeah, like really have your process locked down. Because for the ones that, what I've heard from other folks, and it's happened to me multiple times, the ones that are like stretching for months, it's because the process is not written down, right? Or they're still trying to figure out who to talk to, whatever. And then another thing I've seen in the market is because they have so many candidates, you're getting ghosted because you are, to Ben's point, you are number 2. So what's happened is they're reaching out to number 1, they're negotiating, they're holding on and letting you go, like setting you free. There's a chance. I don't know of a gracious way to communicate that. It's not a fun email to get. Okay, you're not our first choice, but hang on. But that's definitely going on.
I will say, if there's a hiring manager listening or a recruiter, I can tell you 100% of the PMs that I help right now through their job searches would love to receive an email that tells them we're at the final stages with a finalist. If we're not, we can't move forward with you until that process concludes. So we'll be in touch and we'll keep sending you updates every week until we have some closure for you. 100% of the candidates that I know would take that as a positive sign about that opportunity. Every day that goes by where they don't hear an update from the company is a day that their view of that company diminishes, and they think that the company is more of a chaotic shit show because they are not hearing anything back. So in this market, I don't think people are too proud to hear that they're number 2. That's my take.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those scenarios where, no news does not equal good news in this scenario, and you start to expect the worst. I'm curious, what about feedback? I think it's become the norm that a lot of companies don't give feedback. And is it a bad experience if you don't get feedback, or is it more of, if you give feedback that's detailed and meaningful, it's just an opportunity for you to delight people and then shine in a positive light? Like, how do you think about feedback, and maybe what are some examples of companies that have, or just like an example of part in the process where someone has done that really well and how that positively impacted your job search in the future?
It really varies. I'd say 90% of the time you get no feedback, or you get very sanitized feedback, so there's no help. But when I did push, I was able to get some nuggets. And you do have to read along the lines, because again, we do live in this litigious culture, and you're going to get, like, maybe you get a little bit more if you keep pushing over email, sanitized. My best experience once was I really thought I hit it off with a particular panel. I liked the hiring manager. I emailed him, said, hey, are you willing to do a chat? And he was totally up for it. He was incredibly gracious and was very candid with me. And that was incredibly helpful. So if hiring managers are willing to do that, I am certainly not going to sue that company. But yeah, that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, let's just say if you're worried someone's going to sue you because you tell them what was missing in the interview process for them, that's probably a sign that you're doing something maybe a little sketchy in your interview process. Because I know people are overly litigious, but yeah, telling someone that, hey, like you didn't have as many years of experience and whatever in insurance, and we really need someone who like is an insider into the insurance world, and we didn't know that until we got to the finalists and realized it would be critical for success in the role. Like, why would someone sue you over that? So it's just, I don't know. I never understand the litigious risk aversion when it comes to that kind of feedback.
I know we're coming on close on time. I want to make sure, is there anything that we didn't cover in this conversation, Mike or Josh, that you really want to drive home before we wrap it up?
I think we covered the main ones. If you take away anything, like, really just put some thought behind your hiring process and train your interviewers and calibrate yourselves. Have that rubric. That's really important. That's what actually makes structured interviewing work. That's where the research lies. If you, again, be aware of bias, watch out for groupthink. The biggest thing that I'd love to see in the market is folks really hiring for strength, not absence of weakness. I think it was Eric Smith who said, hire the divas. Think about that. It's those people who scare you at work that like really move the ball. Your default hiring practice is going to be seeking out conformity, right? So just be aware of that. And sorry, probably one more. It's probably a lot. Probably the biggest one we didn't talk about was just start with humility. You're not that good at hiring. I'm sorry. Everybody listen to this. I'm not the best person in hiring. You're not. Start with humility. Have a process for evaluating your employees fairly. If you do have to let someone go, it sucks. It's the worst things you have to do as a manager, but just have that humility.
I heard, isn't it true that like something like if you're the best at hiring, it's like you get 1 out of 2 right or something like that? It's something crazy. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah. Josh, what do you think? Any closing thoughts?
I think that's a scary number for founders, because when you're hiring for your startup, you're not trying to get the best person necessarily, right? You're trying to avoid hiring the person who's going to tank your company, because you can certainly, I don't know, tanking your company sounds dramatic, but you can certainly hire somebody who's going to be really expensive from a time and effort and attention perspective, and you really want to avoid that. So I think this is back to spend a lot of time with your JD, right? Don't publish it, right? The one you publish, that's a marketing document, but think through, what's the job really all about? What are they going to be able to have to do? How will I know if they're being successful? What are the failure modes that we're trying to avoid here? And I don't know, Mike, maybe I disagree with you, right? You're not always trying to hire the one perfect, amazing candidate, right? You're trying to avoid something bad happening, right? A lot of hiring is about avoiding downside risk, but be clear about which one you're trying to accomplish.
Both are probably true here. And maybe there's wisdom in Linear's process of doing work trials for every single person that joins the company before making a hire too. I haven't seen that get adopted at scale.
That allows you to do work trials. If you have those 3 things, the brand and the opportunity and the compensation that allows you to do work trials, oh my God, do work trials.
Amazing. This has been a lot of fun. I know we're coming on time, but 2 final questions for you, Josh and Mike. One is, where can people find you and to figure out more about what you're up to and the work you do? And then 2, how can the audience be helpful to you?
I can go first. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. How you can be helpful for me, I would just say, actually take some of this to heart. Sit down and, again, be humble, think about your process, try to improve, see how you can stand out. Because again, like, to me, I always approach this as, imagine if you can find those diamonds in the rough, right? And you're not fishing in the same small pond as everybody else. Like, how awesome is that? There's tons of candidates out there. There's tons of great people that are being overlooked by a very like formulaic process right now.
That's great. You should all do that thing. I have a really easy to search for name. You can find me at jhm.lol. If you are struggling, if you're a founder or a executive startup, you're struggling with hiring, reach out to me. I got some great resources I'm happy to share, point you in various directions. Looking forward to pointing you at Mike's forthcoming article, cross my fingers, about how to do this thing. I can share some of my stuff, and this is also what I do professionally. So if you need someone helping alongside you, I'm happy to talk about that as well.
Cool. I think that's a wrap. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark, for putting this together.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.